Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk a little bit in this video about how I was forced to accommodate all of the ongoing crimes and harassment against me that my deranged mother's been at the root of. Now, because she's used so many different agencies and other people to help her harass me and commit crimes against me, this grew more like intense and just like more problems overall over the course of time. It steadily grew momentum from the time I was a small child, and as I was getting a little bit older, all the way to the current day, because this has never stopped. This all slowly grew momentum, and more people and more agencies became involved over the course of time. So I'm going to talk about from the time I was a small child and I was learning how to accommodate this, and then kind of in my teenage years, and then when I broke free at 18 and purchased my own home, and how things were different, but it was still going on, and then how it was still slowly growing momentum till today. So I was born to my parents. I am my parents' only child. My mother never wanted kids. My dad did. And they never had any more kids. And most of my grandparents were deceased before I was even born. So by the time I was born, I only had one living grandparent. And my mother was trying to make sure that I did not trust her or couldn't tell her anything. She was trying to twist things so that I believed that she just couldn't be trusted, when it was actually the other way around. And I never actually followed that. I felt safer with my paternal grandmother than I did with my mother, just based on like an energetic vibe. And I still also just never brought anything up with my grandma, and she probably would have been the right person to tell, because she probably could have done something about it. So I didn't fully see her in the light my mom was trying to paint. But I also didn't try to tell her either. So I just kind of remained neutral, but I was also very small. So this went on from the time I was born, learning to talk. Right away, my mother was already like gaslighting me and causing reactive abuse situations and laughing like a deranged lunatic. And she would say things to me like, nobody's ever going to believe you, after she would do stuff to me. And I'd be like, hey, that's not fair, or you can't do that, or you're lying. And that's how she would react to me. And then as I got a little older, she would incorporate the saying, I don't know why you always think everybody's out to get you. And she'd laugh like a deranged lunatic. Because once I was in elementary school, she was using my teachers to harass me, and she was placing delusional phone calls behind the scenes. And she'd be laughing like that because she was getting away with it, and she was causing it. And anything I was bringing up, it wasn't false. This was all really happening to me, but it was her causing it. So she did this literally from the time I could talk, and just grew it on and on. And because I was the only child, and usually I was either with my mom or with my dad. Most of the time it was one or the other. A lot of the time it was not both, unless it was like a weekend, because for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, they worked opposite shifts. So I did have a cousin that would babysit me from time to time. And I guess I considered it like neutral. And then I just like felt normal. I felt like safe with my dad, but I just assumed he realized that she was doing all this stuff to me. And he never realized, and I didn't figure it out till 2019, once I had my brain injury, my second brain injury, and I was under treatment repairing the brain tissue, regrowing it through hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Once the memories were coming back even more, because they had been coming back for about 3 years at that point since the first brain injury, that's when I saw things very clearly and realized he did not know that she was doing this all while I was growing up. I just assumed he knew because of the way she was portraying it and the way she would triangulate and manipulate, and like, she's an illusionist. She'd make something look like something that it wasn't. And because I was so little and I didn't know anything else, like I don't know anything different than that, she was able to get away with this. So there's a lot of things she would do that no one else ever realized she was doing to me. And it all started from the time I could talk. She was already very jealous of me from the moment I was born, when I took my dad's attention away from her and it went on to me, because I was a newborn baby and I needed to be taken care of, and I was a preemie. So that started right away, and her behavior started right away because of that. So there never was a bond. I was a C-section baby. We never bonded. There's never been a relationship. I was just forced to tolerate her to like a certain age when I would just, like, since there was no bond and she always acted that way toward me from the minute I was born. As I got a little older, there just continued to be no relationship, no bond. And I just learned to like tolerate her and kind of ignore her behavior. But at the same time, she'd create so many reactive abuse situations. I didn't know how to control myself or what she was actually doing, and that she was doing that so it appeared as if I was a certain way. And she would do it in private, but then we'd also be like around other people. So that way when we went back out into the open, or we walked into a room or somebody else walked in and there was going to be other people there, it would look like I was always the problem. I just didn't understand the triangulation and the manipulation and what she was actually doing. And because I was so little, I didn't know how to control it because it was so irritating that somebody's always doing this to me, that my response was always to scream and cry because I was very small. I was like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. This is going on. So when you're that age and you don't know anything different and you don't have an actual mother, like most people have an actual mother to turn to, or even a grandmother to turn to. Now, the one I did have, I didn't have like regular contact with. Well, I guess I did in a sense, but I wasn't allowed to like contact her on my own either. And there wasn't the first line of family members that I guess you could consider like the closest first line. She made sure that I wouldn't be able to reach out to any of these people, and she controlled the flow of information and the false narrative about me with them the whole time, all the way to the current day. So I still didn't have like a first line of people to reach out to. I was never allowed to like reach out to any of these people by myself. This is way back before cell phones. We only had house phones and like actual phone numbers written down back then. But she made sure that I wouldn't be able to even do that. So there was no one to turn to. And because of the way she would beat the shit out of me and gaslight me and say all these things and make my life miserable, if I tried to tell on her, it would become worse if I did try to tell somebody. And then she kept it going once I got into school and I had teachers. In case I tried to tell any of the teachers, she would make it much worse on me. So I just never really tried to tell any of the teachers. Because I grew up with it and I don't really know what to call it and I don't have the words to explain what this is. And so I never really tried either. And once I caught her poisoning batches of food when I was about 5-ish and I confronted her, and now I realize I probably shouldn't have said anything to her. That's what caused this all to amplify and her behavior towards me to just become more intense with it. Because she wanted to make sure I wouldn't tell anybody. You know, her response to me wasn't, that of somebody who wasn't doing that either. Like, her response was, who told you that? How do you know that? No, that's the response of somebody who's really doing that. So I did catch her as a young child. And so her behavior grew worse the older I got. And it was just intolerable to live with her. And I had to I would just be in fight or flight mode the whole time I'd be with her. And my life was very structured because my dad worked all during the day. My mom worked midnights till I was in kindergarten or first grade. And then I had a cousin that watched me, in the in-between phase a little bit. So I would just have periods of time where I knew my system in my brain could kind of relax. But when I would be just with her, then I'd be in an extreme fight or flight mode. And I just lived that way. It continued on all the way till I got my own home when I was 18. And because she was always controlling the flow of information between me and other people, and that way I couldn't ever reach out to anybody or ever have a support system, she was plotting this and planning this all along so I wouldn't have a support system growing up or as an adult. And there just wasn't anyone to turn to get this all situated, especially because I don't know what to call it. Now, there's no internet back then. People aren't talking about narcissism and all the things that come with that the way they do today. People were not talking about this back then. And I was just limited to whatever books I could get my hands on, basically, to get my information. And so I didn't even get any books with that type of information until I was in 11th grade. And I took a psychology class in 11th grade. And I actually pointed it out to her that what's in my book is what she is. And I do believe it said narcissist and it said some other phrases. And she got really mad and she flipped out when I pointed that all out to her. So that was another big mistake. I shouldn't have did that. She then began making my life even more miserable from that point forward. It was already miserable. But the way she controlled the flow of information, the way she would have full control over me, so that way I couldn't even like tell my dad or tell my cousin these things, especially because I didn't have the vocabulary for it. She made sure that I wouldn't even attempt to tell anybody else. And because I don't have siblings and I don't know any different, but I do know, and I see friends and I see other people around me, that that's not their lives. You know, I knew that it wasn't normal, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was just so small. I really didn't know what to do about it. And I was just always in a constant state of fight or flight mode. So I lived that way. And once the trust was left for me in 1991, that's where everything amplified even further, because immediately she's planning out how this money is going to go in her pocket, and she's never going to give it to me. And she's taking all the stipulations that were read to her in the room by the attorneys, basically, and they told her this is how you can access it. These would be the only reasons you would be able to access it before then, or this is the only way you would be able to do this. When they stated all that stuff to her, she immediately began plotting and planning how she's going to make one of those things happen, which would be, you need to deem me mentally incompetent, you need to make sure I'm deceased, or that I end up incarcerated long term. And so that's what she began trying to do, all of them. She was working all these angles at once. So the poison batches of food then amplified. And so then she wasn't just doing it to me, she's doing this to me and my dad. And she was doing it to my paternal grandmother as well. When we'd visit her and she'd bring her food, she would put poison in her food as well. And there would be other times if she was arguing with a family member or a friend or somebody she didn't like, and she was going to a party where they were bringing a dish, she would poison the dish. It didn't matter that, you know, it was only the one person at the party. She'd poison everybody. She'd poison the whole dish. Didn't matter who ate it to her. So I know that's happened numerous times as well. But I do know a lot of the times when I was growing up, my dad and me, we would just go out to eat and we wouldn't eat whatever food she left for us. And once I got it, I was probably about 11 or 12, and I was starting to generate my own money. And I would just eat at school, and I would pay for school lunch out of my own pocket because I was making money really young. And I just wouldn't eat her food, and I would just buy my own food. So that's another way I was able to kind of like get around it. And I did that going forward, like forever going forward. And I started working in restaurants when I was 14. So going forward, I was able to bypass that by me making my own money and me working in restaurants all the way until, I worked in restaurants for 20 years. So all the way until I got into my own home at 18. That's kind of how I went about bypassing a lot of it. Although for dinner, the majority of the time, I did eat dinner there all the way up until I was probably about 16 and I started working more and I just wasn't home for dinner anymore. But so she was poisoning dinner almost every night since the trust was left all the way to the time I was about 16. So for about 9 years, it was regular at dinner. But the lunch, if she tried to pack me a lunch for school, or I think eventually I just started like declining her to make it at all. And I would just buy the school lunch. And then my dad was also giving me money to buy the school lunch for a period of time, or if I ran out of money, because I think he knew that like her food was bad. I don't know if he like understood she was poisoning it the way she was, because he did admit numerous times over the years that he knew she did this. I just don't think he realized how frequent she was doing it. I think he just thought it was not as often as she actually was doing it. He wasn't having the symptoms that I was having nightly. His symptoms were different. He had other symptoms start to appear and other issues start to happen to him that were not happening to me. So I had more of like a heartburn issue. It wasn't really heartburn. And it was the poison coming back up. And it would happen like within the hour usually, or sometimes even a little sooner than that. And the older I got, the quicker it would settle in. And then once I broke free from all of this and the poison batches of food later down the line showed up at my house, she would use my dad to get these poison batches of food in my house once I was an adult in my own home, and she wasn't allowed at my houses, but my dad was. It took me a while to realize that's what was actually going on. And so I would have a reaction after. It would be this heartburn, but it wasn't heartburn. So it took until my injury, because I was so severely poisoned by carbon monoxide, and all chemicals, toxins, and poisons and gases were a problem for me at that point. Going forward, any small minuscule amount, because of her doing that to me long term, and then because of my injury, it amplified like times 1,000. And so any little small amount, if it got in my system, I had like a hyper reaction, like near death experience type reaction for days, even with a small amount. So that did happen twice closer to the beginning stages of my injury. And then didn't really happen again until my dad's injury. So by then I had a lot of treatment. I crossed several thresholds. I wasn't so close to dying, but I still have an extreme reaction. It doesn't take very long. And I do have extreme reactions if it does make it into my system. So it started to a little bit once my dad became injured because we were eating at his room. My mom was slipping poison batches of food in at the care facility and sneaking them to my dad. Not really sneaking them. She's putting it in the food and then just bringing it to him. And so there was times where it did make it into the food that I did ingest once his injury happened. So that happened, I don't know how many times. I'd say like 3 times accidentally. But there was a few times I did it intentionally just to prove that's what she was doing to him because I was so sick and injured. It loads up in my open brain tissue. So I did do it a couple times intentionally. But other than that, I went all those years without it getting into my food because I had my own home. There was a period of time where after I walked away from my second home and before I bought my third home, she did have access to my food. I kept my food in a separate fridge at their house outside in the garage. And I even caught her in it at one point. And that was also during the time I had like severe heartburn issues going on. This is before it really clicked that that's what that was all along. It had nothing to do with me having regular heartburn. It was the poison food all along. And it was like kind of from that point forward that shortly after that, it had only entered my system, a handful of times going forward once I figured all that out after that. So once I got in this house in 2017, probably a few years prior, the food never got ingested by me except for those couple times after my injury and then those handful of times after my dad's injury. So all those years growing up, it was a nightly problem. My dad had different issues. He had a lot of like itching going on. He would take Zyrtec, and I think the itching was due. That was his body's reaction to whatever it was. There was a time where he had a heart thing happen when I was about 10. I think this is when she was experimenting with different substances, or she put too much in it. And there was another time where that happened also right before his injury in 2023. So I think it was the end of 2022 where a similar incident had happened. So it probably was due to that. And I know at one point he had hemorrhoids removed. And now that I know what I know today, and due to all the systemic poisoning I've had with my own injuries and everything that I've had to learn coming out of all this, because now I have a continuous problem for life. Now I know that the internal swelling in your body is caused by poisons and stuff that shouldn't be in there. And looking back over my dad's symptoms over the years, that's kind of what was going on regarding that. And why he ended up having hemorrhoids removed. That's what was causing them, was her poison batches of food. And then all the urinary tract infections that he had all prior to his injury. He had a lot of them, and that's not normal for a man. It was from her poison batches of food. And now I did have that symptom as well along the way when I was a very small child. And then I went a whole bunch of years where that didn't happen because I was on my own. And then there was a period of time where I did have a few of them down the line. But most of the time that was my dad's symptom because she had full access to his food all these years. So now that he's injured, every time he gets rushed back to the hospital, it starts with urinary tract infection, leads to like blood in the urine, and then he coughs up a lot of phlegm, sometimes leads to pneumonia, and then sepsis starts settling in, and sometimes he goes into full-blown septic shock. And that's the result of him eating the poison batches of food since his injury. So it's been a very long-term issue. I've been dealing with this my entire life. That's why people look at me strange or when they're questioning me about it, like even if it's police or hospital staff, they don't understand the degree of knowledge I have on this, how long this has been going on, how I know all this. They can't comprehend it because they think that if it's in your system, or regular people think this too, but that you could just get a blood test and it would be in your blood. That's not how it works. That you have to know the substance or the category of substances to find it in somebody's system. And if you don't know that and you're not checking for that specific substance, you're not going to get a hit in the blood work. It's not going to show anything. And so nobody's aware of this. So when I'm trying to report this to different police departments and stuff, they don't understand it. And I do know this because I hired a private lab. I believe it was the beginning of 2020. It was either the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And I had a full-blown conversation with the scientist who understood that I knew exactly what I was talking about. And it's because of everything I've been through. And that is how it works. So it's other people don't understand how that works. So that's one of the major things I had to accommodate and deal with long-term from the time I was a small child. And nobody, I guess nobody ever tried to stop her. Even after my dad's injury, and I was heavily trying to stop this and get somebody to listen. And she just keeps telling people I have a mental disorder and a drug problem, and she knows everything because she's the mother. And no one's comprehending this is a deranged lunatic. We've had no relationship, no contact for decades. I've been on my own all these years. None of what she's saying is real. Nobody ever took the time to actually look into me or what I really have going on in life. And everybody believed her. So nobody ever tried to stop any of this, which is part of the reason I'm making a lot of these videos. So now that I've got about 250 videos up, there's a lot of information, and you can put together the crimes and piece together everything I'm talking about, and it all makes sense. So now back to accommodating like the harassment and the crimes and the abuse. This is part of it. This was a very long-term issue, still going on today, except for she just doesn't have ways to get the food into my home today. Well, I guess she could try to use my older two kids, but like I buy specific items. I know what I bought, what I didn't. It wouldn't be some random item in my house, even if she were to try to use them today to get it in, because initially she was using my dad, and now my dad's out of commission and she can't use him to get it into my house. So, it's not really a current issue for me. It's an issue for my dad. Now, because my oldest son is staying at their house currently, that's a whole manipulation situation as well. It's a very sick, disgusting situation because he technically is diagnosed with high-functioning autism twice. He's very easily manipulated, and she is manipulating him to a pretty good degree. He has screamed her delusions at me in the recent several months, and he really believes everything she's saying to him, and she's rewriting history and repeating delusions, and it's a serious issue. So I do worry about him being there because he could potentially ingest this as well, being there. And she does have intent to kill sometimes when she's doing this. So that's where it all amplified when the trust was left, because I think that's where she got this idea in her head that that's where the idea came that she's going to get rid of my dad and she's going to get rid of me, and she's going to collect on all this money from the both of us. But she wanted to wait for my dad to work a little longer so she could collect on, everything in his 401k, and she was going to take their house, and then she's going to take everything from me. She was doing it to the both of us because she's separately planning on taking everything from the both of us, is what it was, and why she started doing it way back then, and why it continued on. Except for it continued on for so long. All these years went by and we're both still alive, so it didn't pan out the way she wanted, but there was a few close calls along the way. In the recent, I'd say 8 years or so, there's been a few close calls with both of us. So that was her intention. I just don't think she expected us both to live as long as we both have, and I do believe that's why it amplified so much after the trust was left. But regarding all the other harassment and the crimes and the abuse along the way, I basically had to deal with my teachers who were always harassing me. Most of them would do it. Most of them would jump on board. There was a few who were neutral, and very few chose not to participate at all and recognize that she has a problem. So I would say I think I had I had maybe 3 or 4 teachers in total in elementary school who didn't participate or saw she was the problem. So in 5th grade, I had 3 teachers. 2 of them jumped on board and participated. 1 saw she was a problem. In 6th grade, I had 3 teachers. 1 was new. I guess you could say all 3 were neutral. They weren't participating in it. Before that, I had only 1 teacher from 2nd grade to 4th grade. So, 1 I think remained neutral, and 1 kind of jumped in on it, and 1 was actually nice. That was before it really amplified. Before that, I went to a Catholic school, and she wasn't doing that at that time, I don't believe, or she couldn't, due to the way everything was so strict and they had so many kids. It didn't work when I was at that school before I got to the Woodhaven, Michigan school district in 2nd grade. So when I got to 7th grade is when I started having 6 teachers. 8th grade, 6 teachers. 9th grade, I think I had 8 teachers. 10th grade, 11th grade, I had 6 teachers. That's where it would amplify, because now I got more teachers, and she's calling all of them at the beginning of every school year, trying to get them all on board. And the majority of them either participated. There'd be maybe 1 out of all the teachers each year who wouldn't participate. It became harder to accommodate because there were so many of them, and the more there are, the more are jumping on board. So that became an issue. And I just had to deal with it, and I knew she was doing it, and there's nothing I can do about it because I don't have anybody to turn to. So I just had to allow it to happen. And that's also why I started working at such a young age, so I could be away from all of it. And I got my first taste of money so young that I figured out how to make more money and more money and more money. And I saw that I was going to have a lot of money very young, and how I was breaking free, and I was out of there. Plotting and planning how I'm going to break free around age 10. And then at 14, I had a good flow of money going. And that's where I kind of just saw the light at the end of the tunnel and knew I only had a handful of years left and I'm out of here. So I was planning the whole time because I knew my dad couldn't see what she was doing. And I also didn't know how to describe it either. And I did try to tell her sister at one point, but she wasn't comprehending anything I was saying. I was too small to have the vocabulary to tell her. And there wasn't really anybody to reach out to. So I do remember just like seeing my friends or other kids' parents and families' houses, and they weren't doing stuff like that. They didn't act that way. It was just really strange because I didn't know how to perceive it. I didn't know what to do. I know I was probably a really strange kid, and it's due to all of this because I was always in fight or flight mode, and I wasn't allowed to get in trouble either. Like, kids are supposed to grow and make mistakes and you learn as you go. Well, that was never allowed to happen because she's not neurotypical. So I'd always have to cover up things that like weren't really that big of a deal. Like a normal person wouldn't find these things like serious issues, whereas she was. And she was just turning everything upside down if one wrong move was made. So I wasn't allowed to make any mistakes whatsoever. Getting my schoolwork done was like impossible because she was always like storming around in the next room, stewing and brewing with her thoughts swirling in her head, waiting to like have a reactive abuse situation pop off. Like she's waiting for the next situation so she can start it. And it would make it so I couldn't even get my schoolwork done. And I kind of stayed in that mode all the way through high school till she ended up eventually getting me kicked out. So I was having to accommodate all of this and like think 10 steps ahead as a young child as all of this is going on. And then I would just stay in fight or flight mode when it would just be the two of us. And then right around age 10, I told her I wasn't ever going back to latchkey again. I had a really hard day. I had a hard time being around other kids because I have a hard time getting through life in general because of what she's doing, and there's no break from it. So right around age 10, I started taking the bus home and being home by myself for a few hours, and that was fine. I'd rather just be alone and nobody bother me. And that was how I started to break free, and I started working. I had my first business shortly after that. I started a babysitting service. So I was already starting to break free. Then I started working in restaurants. So I broke free a little further. But I just stayed in fight or flight mode the entire time, trying to plot and plan how I was going to lie my way out of this and that and this and that. Should I make one small mistake? Like I wasn't allowed to grow up. I wasn't allowed to do what other people were doing and grow into my normal self the way regular people do. So that was an issue, and it just continued to stay an issue. And then once you get to be in your teenage years, you know, you're going to make more mistakes, but you're growing into being an adult. Well, I wasn't allowed to do that. So she created more problems, and life became even harder. And it got so far out of hand, it was impossible to deal with her. So that's why I was already like heavily making good money and already about to buy my first house. I just didn't know. I didn't know how to make those steps to get there, but once I had my job at 16 and I started working at Steak and Shake and I stayed there 5 years and I made good money the whole time I worked there, that's where I kind of saw the avenue out. And then when I was 18, I bought my first house. So it was a small mobile home. It was brand new on a corner lot, so I had a lot of privacy. It was like 20 minutes away from my parents, so it wasn't like too close. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter that it was that far away. I didn't care if I didn't have all the answers to life. I didn't care. I just needed to break free, and that was the only way I was ever gonna be safe in my own body or in my own home and be able to live. But right away, she started using CPS to harass me right away. So right away, that safe feeling was broken. I do remember there being like this huge feeling of relief when I got moved in there, but right away CPS came, and then they came numerous times from the time I lived there because then they had her information from the first time, and then they would repeatedly talk to her, which I was aware of. So in a sense, I felt safe, but in a sense I didn't because they kept showing back up. And then she got the one lady to participate with her very heavily, Courtney Villarreal. I talk about her in a couple of the videos. She was the one who was able to fraudulently get this to go to court the one time, and it didn't work. But after that, I knew I wasn't safe there, and that's why I got forced into buying my second house before I was ready. So here I was plotting and planning how I'm going to accommodate the harassment and the crimes, because it wasn't, I mean, I guess it was crimes, but like the harassment and the abuse, which shifted into crimes and then organized crime over the course of time. That's how I ended up shifting into my next house, knowing I just wasn't safe. And I didn't have any problems in that department at the second house, but I became a victim of the mortgage crisis. So as time went on, I was just completely unaware. Here she was still growing this false narrative with all these people she was controlling the flow of information with, which is hundreds of people, everybody she knows. And she was still placing delusional phone calls. She was attempting to access this missing stolen trust fund by portraying herself to have custody of my older two kids. That's why she was snapping all these pictures of them along the way. And she was making it look like she was raising them, and I was just nowhere to be found. And that was never what was going on. They were always living with me. I always had custody of them. Even if they try to tell you that what my mom's saying is real and it's all true and she raised them, she's been manipulating them and brainwashing them since they were small children. Even though there's long periods of time where they were not allowed around her, it's still in effect from long term, and then she's able to reprogram it, and even recently it comes out of their mouths. So what comes out of their mouths can't be believed. Their side of the story isn't a legitimate side of the story because of the amount of brainwashing and what she has done to them from the time they were small children, and then even more so in the recent years since my injury. That's where it all amplified with all that with them. So that got very far out of control. And so even today, their opinion on all this, even though they're adults, it is not relevant to the situation. It can't be trusted. It can't be counted into any of this because of the amount of brainwashing and what she's done. So those effects are permanent, and the only way to stop all that is for arrests to be made, the truth to come out, matters to start getting situated. But then along the way, I had all these issues because the agency calling, all the delusional phone calls to all these agencies, all these places, all these different police stations, she's the one doing it. She's even called places I've worked before as well. So she's the one causing all these problems. If she finds out something happens, she inserts herself in it and calls. That's never stopped all the way to the current day. It just grew more and more over the course of time, where I was always forced to accommodate this. And then I saw right away, once I got into my first house at 18, I saw I had to have a large financial cushion due to the fact that I knew I couldn't fail. I couldn't go backwards. I couldn't go back and say, oh, I messed up, I need to come live with you. Well, I also owned the home too. So I wanted to make sure I always had a large financial cushion. And right away, I started off having one. I had to get rid of my oldest son's dad. He was only in my house for, I think, like a year. I had to get rid of him to do that because he was sucking off all the resources more than what he was ever bringing in. I was paying for everything. So once he was gone, I was able to have like $3,000 to $5,000 all the time I had to have because of how she operated. And I had to accommodate the crimes, the harassment, the abrupt situations she would create. And it had to stay that way going forward. And then once I got into the second house, that's when I started seeing like, okay, I need to have that cushion be a little bigger. But I was never able to regrow it because of the amount of money I was spending from her escapades and me having to jump into that next house. And I still own the first house, and it's causing all these problems. The market's crashing. I'm making less money. All these issues were happening. But that's when I saw the opportunity to walk away and purchase my next house with cash. So right away, I stacked up my cushion, always having to have a really large cushion because she's always creating all these problems. I started thinking, well, that $5,000 needs to turn into closer to $10,000. And so I kind of always had that in mind. And then once I moved to this house in 2017, I'm thinking, okay, so that cushion needs to be even bigger because then I have like more stuff to take care of. By then I had a third kid. So I always had to have a large financial cushion because I'm always having to, I'll abruptly have to leave and run off and have a go bag in my trunk and like be ready to go and at the drop of a dime and run off because there's always agencies chasing me, different CPS chasing me, police chasing me, all these different agencies, all these problems, all these delusional phone calls. It doesn't matter. It could be a regular company she could be doing this to. She did this to the manager I worked when I worked at Applebee's in Taylor, Michigan. She did that and was calling her regularly. All these situations along the way. Anything she can to cause chaos and destruction, she places delusional phone calls. Since I've lived in this house, nothing but chaos and destruction using my city's police department and the actual city itself. Once the 2021 Ford gas bill happened, she had been calling them regularly all during that. So she manipulated everybody that works at the city and the entire police department And there's an ongoing problem to this day from all those delusional phone calls from the time of my injury in 2018 and then the gas leak in 2021 all the way to the current day. There's still issues with all of them because they all took her delusional phone calls. Now that's created a lot of fallout for me, just that situation alone, the city and the police department. And now that the Sergeant Matthew Wilchinski over here in Flat Rock still waiting to falsely arrest me. Which he had threatened me numerous times. It's because she's told him, this isn't my house, other people pay the bills here, or whatever she's been telling him, something along those lines. And he believed it all along, and that was never reality. So he's still currently waiting to falsely arrest me some more, and he already caused significant re-injury to my brain tissue, as it took all those years to repair. It took almost 200 grand out of pocket. I was over 100 grand out of pocket when he significantly re-injured me. And that's due to my mother's delusional phone calls. So I was never able to get back to where I was. Prior to that, I do need an upgraded hyperbaric chamber at this point, and the only way to get it is to purchase a new one for 65 grand. The center I was treating at is now permanently closed, and my mother has destroyed my different businesses. Now, she used all of these different people along the way. Once I got into this house in 2017, she grew more jealous and envious. And then my dad was over here working on stuff. So here she was poisoning his food every time he'd be over here working on stuff at this house, or having my kids cut the grass and he'd be helping them. She'd poison his food even more once I got to this house. And then she's placing more delusional phone calls to my city's police department. And then she's repeating delusions to my dad and my older two kids. She was getting him to bring them back to her house so she could repeat delusions to them. Then they'd be brought back here and scream the delusions at me and cause further problems, except for the fact that I had a medical emergency, an extreme brain swelling episode, and I was left in an extreme state, stuck that way continuously for 3 years without one day of relief. And it was due to her crimes as a Beaumont Hospital employee and preventing treatment. Now, she was working all these angles because she's trying to make sure that I don't survive so she can access the rest of the missing stolen trust fund. And at the same time, she's manipulating the people around me, repeating delusions. So they're screaming when I can't have sound and I'm in extreme distress with 50, 60 severe symptoms at once. And she's calling my city's police department in the background, telling them I've always been this problem. Other people pay the bills here. This isn't my house. I always had this mental disorder. There is no injury. And she's causing all the chaos and all the problems by placing all these calls. It amplified significantly once I got this house because she's so jealous of it because it's a $400,000 house. And she can't have my reality be true because she's been lying to everybody for decades about me. Probably lying about my other houses. And when I paid for all those houses too, I think she told him my dad was helping pay for those houses or something along the way. And so once I got here, that amplified even more. And 6 months after I moved in here is when my injury became extreme and I was stuck in an extreme state of brain swelling. So all those issues, she's causing all of them from behind the scenes, pulling all the strings. I'm having to accommodate all this. So now once I became injured, I didn't just have to financially accommodate this. I then had to accommodate an extreme medical emergency. My injury came first because nothing else within a day could be dealt with. I literally was just trying to keep myself alive and keep my son alive. And we were so overloaded with carbon monoxide, both of us by this time, with brain injuries, and we're in extreme distress. And that's what had to be dealt with every second of every day. Nothing else could be done. And so that had to jump in front of me accommodating the crimes and the harassment and the bullying and everything she's doing. That then had to come first for 3 solid years, about 3.5 years. That had to come first no matter what. So the accommodating the chaos and the harassment and the bullying, that took a back seat. But I still had to accommodate it. And it wasn't accommodatable because of the amount of screaming going on, what this is causing, the 911 calls, the CPS calls, everything that's going on all during this. It was an impossible situation. Just constant extreme distress, like physical distress, which was turning into mental and emotional distress because there was never a minute of relief from any of it for 3 years. And I had to spend over 100 grand out of pocket on treatments by the time I did finally cross that first threshold. I was probably approaching 100 grand out of pocket around the time I crossed the first threshold. It took 2 years of daily treatment to cross that first threshold, 3 years from the time the injury began, because I went 14 months before beginning treatment from the time the injury began, all due to my mother's crimes, and then preventing treatment in the hospital system, pulling staff aside, having them enter false information into our medical records. So they would put that, she would tell them it's just a mental disorder. I've always had one. She's the mother. She knows all this. They would put something different, but they would state that they spoke with her. So I knew based on their reaction to me in person, didn't matter that they wrote something different in there. I seen it happen in person, and then their reaction toward me, I knew that that's what was said. So that's how we were left without treatment initially, but it was so she could access the missing stolen trust fund. So if you don't treat carbon monoxide poisoning, an extreme case of it like that, you don't survive. So that's how I ended up at the private center. And I just so happened to have one of my streams of income happen to be a stream of income where I generate a lot of money in a very short period of time. And that's how I managed to cover all our treatments and pay for everything. So if that was not the case, we wouldn't have survived. But she was causing all of this all at the same time, physically inserting herself, repeating delusions, and then calling my city's police department, repeating delusions to my dad, repeating delusions to my kid. Everybody screaming, she's nowhere in the vicinity. She's not even allowed at any of my houses. She's causing all of this. This is where it became out of control, because then I had to accommodate the injury first, but I'm still having to accommodate the crimes and harassment, and it's impossible. And I'm still having to generate the money to keep the treatment going, or we're still not going to live. And it went on in that state for a little over 3 years, where it had to be that way. So it was the jealousy and envy over me purchasing this home here in Flat Rock that just sent her overboard, especially after she went on the 2013 escapade and completely wiped me out, and I wasn't able to purchase that next house fully with cash the way I was working on doing. She had to disrupt all that because she was so jealous and envious that that's what I was about to do. She was jealous and envious for numerous reasons. And she had to stop all that from happening because she had spent so many years lying to everybody about who I am and what I have going on in life. She had to stop that from happening. And she was also still attempting to get my kids in her possession full time so she could get more of the stolen trust fund, because I believe she was already accessing it at this point, which is why there was all these repeated kidnappings of my kids, and why the Brownstown police kept helping her do this, because they helped on numerous occasions. They helped pull this off. They may have even wrote false letters or even possibly showed up in court without me even aware that this is what's going on, and her trying to say that she's got a power of attorney or she's got some guardianship over me or she's been raising my kids and I'm just nowhere to be found. It's possible some of them showed up or wrote letters on her behalf or something, or some family members maybe did this as well. It's possible that has happened. I do believe it's possible she has a fraudulent power of attorney or possibly a fraudulent guardianship over me and I'm just completely unaware. That could be just because of what has happened and how she's been able to pull all these strings and create all these problems. And people don't believe me when I talk about no matter what avenue of things I'm trying to say she's trying to do or whatever's going on, they immediately take her side. Even if like she's kidnapping my kids and I can't get them back because they really believe she's raising them. There's no physical proof of this. That's not reality. Those are delusions. She's never been raising my kids. Why do they keep acting like that's real? That's not normal. So that's what makes me think there could be some type of legal paperwork that she has that's fake. But that's where the chaos just kind of amplified it and went out of control, was once I got into this house. But at the same time, I also became injured. So then I had to shift like what came first, because first and foremost, the injury had to be dealt with. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no going around it. So that had to be dealt with. And then the crimes and the harassment and the escapades all amplified. And then they amplified even more once COVID was over. Even though I'd crossed several thresholds and went back to work after COVID, that's where she had every area of my life infiltrated. People following me back and forth between Michigan and Ohio constantly. This turned into groups of people, additional people, all these different angles of people she had. She was taking the money that she got out of the missing stolen trust fund initially, that she got fraudulently, and she was paying these people to keep it all going and the harassment going because she's planning on gaining access to what's left, but she needs to be incarcerated, deemed mentally incompetent, or deceased. So she's working all these angles. It got out of control nonstop from that point forward. It never stopped. And that's still what's gone on to the current day. And then once my dad became injured, it amplified even further. She used his injury to attempt to do all those things as well. And all these corrupt people who've been helping her along the way, that amplified even further after my dad's injury, after mine and after my dad's injury. And they're all helping because they're all going to get a piece of the pie for themselves too, as they already have in the past. So it just became out of control. There was people following me around and collecting information on me, bringing back information on me along the way from the time I cut all ties at 18. So she'd send people to visit my work as customers or get jobs where I've worked. And she did that from the time I was 18 because she no longer had direct access to me since I wasn't under her roof. That started right away. It was just not, 3 people or 10 people or 20 people. It was only like one person at a time here and there. And then eventually it grew into constant once I had my injury in 2018. And then it grew into more and more people going forward all the way to the current day. So the first, I'd say from 2002 to 2018, it wasn't just constant all these people. She was using these people and agencies to help her and such. And there wasn't people directly up in my face every day collecting the information, bringing it back and harassing me daily. It was not daily, but there would be like one individual, and then there'd be like another one, and then there'd be like another one for a period of time. It wasn't a whole bunch all at once, ongoing. That didn't happen until after I had my injury and I was in this house in 2018, all the way to the current day, because that's still going on in the current day. The only issue is I had pretty much retired about 2 years ago after the damage to my house happened. And then I had all this work to do here in my house. But the crimes had amplified, and the harassment and the bullying had amplified to such a good degree. There was about 30 people in on this all at once. And my life was in grave danger. I did acquire a fifth brain injury because of this. And these people basically jumped me and set me up to be like fired from the places I worked at. And it was, behind it all was my mother and the people she's paying, and they're bringing in other people. And that's how there was just so many. So shortly after that is when I retired after the damage to my house happened. I've been here ever since, working on it and restructuring the different businesses I'd already had lined up long ago, because she destroyed both of them. Because my real estate business, this house was already supposed to be an Airbnb in 2022. And I was supposed to retire right in from my entertainment income right into doing what I was doing, and be on to the next house a while back. So she destroyed all of that with her delusional phone call placing and her escapades and crimes. And once that all happened, I ended up restructuring and then doing a lot of the work myself, where I was no longer having to physically leave to be at a place to work. And this was already in place long ago. She just doesn't know my plans. People don't know my plans. I don't share my plans. So once that happened 2 years ago, people didn't have direct access to me anymore. There was no finding me at work. There is no regular schedule. There's no finding me somewhere. That's where I got a lot of people trying to insert themselves into my life and try to reach out to me, like on different social media sites, like people I don't even know, and some people who were involved in this years ago, and other people messaging me. And all these people were involved at some point or another, or some of them were newer to the harassment and the bullying, inserting themselves into my life. Either way, they were reaching out by phone, social media and such, because nobody was able to physically find me out and about anywhere, because all of my work was within my home, or I was working on everything in the home, or it was within the home that I'm able to take care of everything I'm doing. So that's where it kind of all changed, and it got cut from the way it was all these 2 decades. That all changed because of how me working was changing. So they didn't know any of this. Nobody knows anything about my plans. Nobody could figure it out. But that's what was actually going on. So that's how I kind of accommodated it. But my long-term plans were already in place. I just had to restructure them. So either way, I should have already been removed from going out and about the way I was into the world and working certain nights or whatever, going places to make my money. That was already in place a long time ago. It shouldn't even went on as long as it did. It only did because of her crimes and escapades and the harassment and all the financial wipeouts that she's caused. So that's how it's changed, and that's how I was able to accommodate it, like, since all that. But there was a good 3-year period where it was nothing but like 5, 10, 20 people at any given moment were in on this, following me around constantly for a solid 3 years. It was literally everywhere I turned. And it was just out of control. So the damage to the house is kind of actually a blessing in disguise that saved me and removed me from the outside world, and removed me because I was physically in danger. These people were also trying to physically take me as well, trying to make me disappear, all to carry out getting their hands on the rest of the missing stolen trust fund. They were all told I was somebody that I'm not. So they thought like this was going to be a lot easier. Nobody understands how I operate, what I really have going on in life. And since they don't perceive my situation properly, they can't come at me the way they want to, because that's just not reality. That's not how I operate. So that was how I got all of that kind of more under control. But there was just a rotation of people occasionally long before I had this house. So I guess from 2002 to like 2017-ish, 2016. It was just like one person here and there, plus the delusional phone calls to the agencies. One person would be following me around at a time, not like groups and a whole bunch of them. And everywhere I turned, it did not become that until after my injury and after I was already moved into this house, which also amplified the jealousy and envy. So that's kind of how I accommodated it. And I just had to shift and make changes as the fallout from each escapade and crime spree would happen. I'd have to kind of shift and make changes and rebuild and restructure, and just kind of like accommodate as things were changing, and as I had the injury and that changed everything. But then the fallout from everything she previously caused, the fallout itself is actually what landed me being placed here and not leaving and working on everything from here. It was her own doing. It was her own escapades that led to all of that. So that was how I was able to kind of accommodate it along the way. I was aware people were following me around here and there all along, and I just didn't have the full picture. There was, random person at my previous house that I owned before this one, and then also showed up at one of the places I worked. And then one person was showing up regularly at the one place I worked at in Detroit, and then eventually started showing up at the places I worked at in Toledo years later. So that's how I started piecing things together all during the course of my injury from 2018 to 2021 or so. A lot of my memories came back full blown. By the time 2021 rolled around, I had most of my memories back. And that's when I was fully piecing it all together because of everything that was going on around me the whole time. And that's what helped piece it all together as a whole, while accommodating the harassment, the crimes, the bullying, the abuse. All of it was just shifting over the course of time because she needed to keep this going all along. Because from day one in 1991, here she was planning on getting this money in her hands. And so she's just carrying all of this out from behind the scenes, all with no contact, no relationship along the way. And it's just changing over the course of time because what I'm doing in life is changing over the course of time. And then she's causing all these financial wipeouts. So it's causing me to have to rebuild, restructure, and I keep having to do this. And it's changing what I'm doing. So then she's changing how people are getting information on me for her and causing problems in my life for her. And that's how it was changing along the way. But that's when it got out of control, was several years back. And then 2 years ago, I was more able to get it under control because I had to change everything about how everything's going due to the fallout of everything she's caused. And then I've been able to keep myself more safe because I've been here in my house. So if people are sitting around watching me now, you're going to have fun. You're going to have a lot of fun and a lot of wasted time because I don't have a scheduled. You're not going to clock me on any type of schedule. And a lot of what I'm working on is within my home. So you're not going to be able to just find me. There's times I don't leave for days or even weeks. So you're not going to find me. You're going to be wasting a lot of time and energy and money. But now that I have the full picture put together, it was all that damage to my house as well that allowed me to sit down and actually piece every incident along the way over the last 25 years or so, kind of piece it all together, get it on paper, get it in chronological order, all the names, all the individuals, all the agencies. That's what allowed me to put it all together as well and start making the videos. So it all kind of just traveled into me getting it together and making the videos. But I was just having to accommodate everything as it came, and that's also the reason for all those financial wipeouts and the Chapter 13 bankruptcy and the loss of all my different businesses. She's at the root of all of them. And here I just keep having to pivot and reaccommodate and restructure, and it's just a constant cycle of it, and it's been all along because I should have never been forced from my first home to land in the next situation, which led to the next and the next and the next. None of those should have ever happened. Normal people are allowed to just grow into their own adult selves from being a teenager and then carry out their life plans. Well, here my life plans have been disrupted over 100 times with all these escapades, all these crime sprees, all these delusional phone calls. And it's still going on today. And I was able to see my dad. Yesterday was Father's Day. I was able to see him that Saturday, 2 days ago. But here she goes again. She's starting up again, trying to use my dad's situation to further carry out the crimes, the harassment, make false reports and attempt to try to get the rest of my missing stolen trust fund in her hands she's probably telling him I did something illegal or I did this. I don't know what she told people. But she managed to get me banned overnight. So, any angle she can get, if something were to happen locally or something happens in my home or whatever, she's going to insert herself in it immediately. That's how she operates. That's how she's been able to carry all this out. And I've been forced to accommodate it literally since I could talk. And it just shifted over the course of time. And the more I was able to still rebuild and still do what I kind of carry out my life plans in a sense, even though they're constantly being disrupted, that's what made her get more jealous and envious, and everything would just amplify because here I was still able to hold on and keep things going, which is what she doesn't want to happen because she's been telling people I'm the exact opposite of who I am, that I'm a broke loser. I never made it in life. I didn't go to college. I just need to go find a job. She's made people I need to find a job for I don't know. She did it numerous times when that's never been my situation. I've been gainfully employed since I was 16 years old, on my path the whole time, gainfully employed the whole time. And no time did I ever need to go find a job. So I don't know what people have been told, but All of it kind of ties together. It just turned into such a disaster because here I still kept carrying out my plans, and she had told so many lies and delusions that I'm the exact opposite, that's why the harassment and the crimes had to be accommodated even more, because she was going even harder at it because of what I was actually achieving. And she had told people the exact opposite. She's trying to force the false narrative to be true. So that's what she did along the way, try to force the false narrative to be true. That's the reason for all the crimes, the harassment, the bullying, the delusional phone call placing. That's the reason for it, because she's trying to force it to look true or be true, and trying to make me lose my different houses and such. And that's the reason for it. So, yeah, I just had to talk about, something that I don't think anybody else in the world has ever had to deal with this ever in history. That's not normal for someone to have to accommodate decades of ongoing crimes and harassment, and their mother has made this a full-time job, and it's all due to a missing stolen trust fund, and she just still thinks she's going to get her hands on it, even though it's all these decades later. That's not normal for people to have to accommodate that level of harassment and crimes and abuse, and it to keep going on and on and on. And the people you would report the crimes to are the ones helping commit the crimes, and there's nowhere to report it to because it's so large scale and long term at this point, with so many people and agencies involved, that it's hard to report, which is also part of the reason for the videos. And then I am making separate videos to send to the larger agencies because I was getting nowhere doing it in person. And now along with that, I do have much proof because I was able to gather a lot of the proof paperwork-wise the last couple of years. So now I'm going to be able to send the videos with the proof, with each situation, with the proof of each, all on a flash drive to the different places I need to send them. So that's the reason for the videos as well, on top of clearing my name, getting arrests made, making it so I can get everything situated, resituated, so I can begin picking up the pieces of my life. That's part of the reason for all of this. But yeah, I'll be back with another one. Thanks. Bye.